The yellow brick road looked like a path to magic, but for its stars, it became a road to heartbreak. One actress worth millions died at just 47. Another actor nearly died after a toxic makeup disaster, while others suffered injuries that changed their lives forever. More than 85 years later, the truth is even darker than the movie itself. Here's what really happened to the Wizard of Oz actors then and now in 2026. Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch of the West. Margaret Hamilton didn't start out chasing villain roles. She started out as a kindergarten teacher who loved children. It was only after she pivoted to acting that Hollywood took one look at her sharp, striking features and decided her fate for her, casting her again and again as the woman audiences loved to hate. Nowhere was that more true than as the Wicked Witch of the West, a performance so chilling it later earned her the #4 spot on the American Film Institute's list of the greatest villains of all time. At that time, she was only 36 years old. That legacy nearly cost her everything. During the witch's fiery disappearance scene, the trapdoor beneath the set failed to open in time while the flames ignited early. The toxic, copper-based green makeup on her face caught fire instantly, leaving her with third-degree burns on her hand and second-degree burns on her face, and 6 agonizing weeks in the hospital. When she returned to set, she flatly refused to film any scene involving fire ever again. Tragically, her stunt double, Betty Danko, was later seriously injured too when the smoke-billowing broomstick exploded beneath her. Margaret Hamilton died on May 16, 1985, from heart failure, at the age of 82, remembered as the woman who turned green skin and a cackling laugh into one of cinema's most enduring images of pure menace. Judy Garland as Dorothy Gale. Judy Garland was never destined for an ordinary childhood. She was born belonging to the stage. Born on June 10, 1922, she was the daughter of a vaudeville performing family and was already singing in front of audiences at 2 years old. That natural stage presence, paired with a powerhouse voice far beyond her years, caught the attention of movie giant MGM. At just 16 years old, she stepped into Dorothy Gale's ruby slippers in The Wizard of Oz. It was the role of a lifetime. A dreamy farm girl from Kansas swept away by a tornado into the magical land of Oz. With wide, wondering eyes and a heart full of kindness, Dorothy led audiences through a journey to find her way back home alongside a cast of unforgettable friends. Within just a few years, that innocent face earned Judy a Juvenile Academy Award and launched a dazzling career that would later include A Star is Born in 1954 and the Cecil B. DeMille Lifetime Achievement Award. But behind the glamour was a machine that showed her no mercy. MGM treated Judy as a tireless money-making tool. To keep her thin enough to fit the image of little Dorothy, she was forced to smoke up to 80 cigarettes a day just to suppress her appetite, living on little more than thin soup. Worse still, the studio pumped her full of amphetamines to keep her working for 72 hours straight, then forced barbiturates down her throat to knock her out for a mere 4 hours of sleep before sending her right back to set. It was a brutal cycle that a teenage girl had no real way of escaping. Judy Garland died on June 22, 1969, from a drug overdose at just 47 years old. Her nervous system, worn down since adolescence by the studio's relentless cycle of stimulants and sedatives, simply couldn't withstand it any longer. She left behind an extraordinary legacy in film and music, along with the immortal image of Dorothy Gale. Frank Morgan as Professor Marvel/The Wizard of Oz. Born in 1890 into a wealthy family who made their fortune in the spice trade, Frank Morgan could easily have lived a comfortable life far removed from the spotlight. But a passion for singing and Broadway theater pulled him in an entirely different direction. With his polished looks and unmistakable voice, he made his way into Hollywood with relative ease, and by the time he joined The Wizard of Oz, he was already 49 years old. He took on 2 roles in a single film. Professor Marvel, the mysterious traveling fortune teller in Kansas who unknowingly sends Dorothy hurrying back home just before the tornado strikes, and the Wizard of Oz himself, the supposedly all-powerful wizard who turns out to be nothing more than an ordinary old man hiding behind a curtain. That contrast became one of the film's most beloved touches. Few people realized that behind his warm, jovial screen presence, Frank Morgan was quietly battling a serious drinking problem for years. On set, under arc lights that pushed temperatures past 38 degrees Celsius, he would often hide a flask in his suitcase to take the edge off the pressure. His career nonetheless continued to flourish, earning him 2 Academy Award nominations, for The Affairs of Collini in 1934 and Tortilla Flat in 1942. Frank Morgan died on September 18, 1949, of a heart attack at the age of 59, just 10 years after his unforgettable turn as the Great Wizard of Oz. He left behind one of the most beloved performances in film history, a wizard who was all-powerful in appearance, yet quietly humble and warm underneath. Jack Haley as Hickory/Tin Man. Before there was any Tin Man, there was a mechanic with a talent for making people laugh. Born in 1897, Jack Haley worked with his hands long before he ever stepped in front of a camera, eventually finding his way into vaudeville and circus revues thanks to a natural gift for singing and dancing. That charm carried him into Hollywood, and by 41, he found himself cast in one of the most physically demanding roles of his career. He played Hickory, the dreaming farmhand back home, and the Tin Man, the hollow-chested figure desperately searching for a heart. But Haley almost never got the part at all. The role had originally belonged to Buddy Ebsen, who nearly died and had to be rushed into an oxygen tent after inhaling pure aluminum dust from his silver makeup. The studio quietly covered up the near-fatal incident and brought Haley in as a last-minute replacement, secretly switching the toxic powder for a diluted aluminum paste instead. Even with the change, the residue from that makeup still caused Haley a severe eye infection, one so serious it nearly blinded him and forced him off set for weeks. Beyond Oz, he found success in Alexander's Ragtime Band in 1938 and earned his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But it was after leaving acting altogether that Haley truly built his fortune, turning his sharp business instincts toward Los Angeles real estate, where he became a hugely successful and wealthy property developer. Jack Haley died on June 6, 1979, from a heart attack at the age of 81. He left behind a legacy split neatly in two: the tender, tin-hearted farmhand who charmed generations of moviegoers, and the shrewd businessman who quietly built an empire far away from the film sets that first made him famous. Ray Bolger as Hunk/Scarecrow. Long before Hollywood ever knew his name, a teenage boy who'd had enough of being bullied at school found refuge in something unexpected: dance. Born in 1904, Ray Bolger climbed his way to becoming one of Broadway's leading musical stars thanks to his obsession. That relentless work ethic eventually landed him a Hollywood contract, and at 35, he stepped onto the yellow brick road as one of its most unforgettable travelers. As Hunk, the good-natured farmhand back in Kansas, and later as the Scarecrow, the lovable straw man convinced he had no brain at all, Bolger brought a rubbery, gravity-defying physicality to the screen that no other actor of the era could match. His flailing limbs and boneless-looking dance moves made the Scarecrow feel almost impossibly alive. What most viewers never knew was the price behind that performance. His Scarecrow makeup was built from dense, non-porous rubber pressed tightly against his skin, sealing his face for hours on end. Unable to sweat or let his skin breathe through more than a year of filming, the adhesive and rubber left permanent pitted scars around his mouth and chin. His career kept climbing regardless. He went on to star in The Harvey Girls in 1946 and was later honored with a prestigious Tony Award for his work in musical theater, cementing his place as one of the era's most gifted song and dance men. Ray Bolger passed away on January 15, 1987, from bladder cancer at the age of 83. he left behind one of the most physically iconic performances in film history. Bert Lahr as the Cowardly Lion. At 15, Bert Lahr dropped out of school and threw himself into traveling comedy troupes, discovering along the way that his rubbery face and knack for physical comedy could make an entire room erupt in laughter. That gift carried him to the top of Broadway's comedy scene, and by 43 he was ready for the role that would define him forever: the Cowardly Lion. The lion is a pure comic gold, a towering beast trembling behind his own roar, equal parts absurd and endearing, stealing scenes with every whimper and bluster. However, the costume told a different story entirely. Made from real lion hide and fur, it weighed nearly 45 kilograms, and under the blazing heat of Technicolor lighting, temperatures inside climbed past 40 degrees Celsius, leaving Lahr constantly drained and dehydrated. His stiff silicone makeup around the mouth left him unable to chew solid food, so for the entire shoot, he survived on soup sipped through a straw. He later won a Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical and became legendary for his role in Waiting for Godot, building his fortune through decades of non-stop Broadway performances and, later, commercials for Lay's potato chips. Bert Lahr died on December 4, 1967, from colorectal cancer at the age of 72, leaving behind a lion whose fear made him unforgettable. Charlie Grapewin as Uncle Henry. Charlie Grapewin ran away from home as a teenager to join the circus, working as a tightrope walker before eventually turning to playwriting and a long, respected career on the stage. By the time Hollywood found him, he'd already built a reputation as a seasoned character actor. And at 69, he became one of the oldest members of the Oz cast, stepping into the role of the weathered, kind-hearted Uncle Henry. As Dorothy's uncle back on the Kansas farm, Grapewin brought a gentle, grounded warmth to the film's opening scenes. The quiet, grandfatherly presence that made Kansas feel like home before the tornado carried everything away. That warmth came at a real cost. During the poppy field scene, thick clouds of artificial snow made from 100% pure asbestos fibers were showered over the cast, and Grapewin, already elderly, breathed it in repeatedly, leaving his body severely weakened. MGM used the material simply because it photographed beautifully on color film, despite manufacturers already knowing it caused serious lung damage. He later delivered one of his finest performances as the grandfather in the classic The Grapes of Wrath in 1940, and died of old age on February 2, 1956, at 86, a farmhand turned actor whose gentle screen presence masked one of the production's quietest, most overlooked hazards. Billie Burke as Glinda the Good Witch of the North. The daughter of a famous circus clown in England, Billie Burke grew up surrounded by spotlights in London and New York, long before she ever set foot on a Hollywood soundstage. That early exposure shaped her into a glamorous, silent film star well before The Wizard of Oz came calling, and by 53, she floated onto screen as the film's most radiant presence. As Glinda, Burke became the picture of grace itself, drifting into scenes in a shimmering pink gown, her voice soft and reassuring, guiding Dorothy through danger with nothing but calm and kindness. It's the role most fans still picture whenever her name comes up. But behind that ethereal image was a woman carrying an enormous weight. After the death of her husband, legendary Broadway producer Florenz Ziegfeld Jr., Burke was left to shoulder his massive debts alone in the wake of the Great Depression. Well into her 50s, she endured hours suspended from thin, unforgiving steel wires for Glinda's floating entrances, with none of the safety gear modern productions rely on today. She earned an Academy Award nomination for Merrily We Live in 1938 and went on to appear in dozens more films, and passed away on May 14, 1970, from Alzheimer's-related dementia at the age of 85, remembered as the good witch who brought elegance to Oz even while quietly fighting battles of her own. Clara Blandick as Auntie Em, born at sea aboard an American merchant ship, Clara Blandick came into the world already carrying a story unlike anyone else's. That start seemed to fuel a fierce passion for acting. By the time she reached The Wizard of Oz, she was 62, ready to play the woman who'd raised Dorothy like her own. That woman was Auntie Em, and Blandick poured into her a kind of steady, no-nonsense yet endlessly loving. Her farm wife warmth became the quiet, emotional anchor Dorothy kept longing to return to. Her final years told a far darker story. Crippling arthritis left her in constant pain and barely able to move, while her eyesight slowly faded into near-total blindness. On April 15, 1962, she had her hair done one last time, dressed herself in an elegant robe, arranged her cherished film mementos carefully around the room, took a fatal overdose of sleeping pills, and placed a plastic bag over her head, ending her life alone in a Hollywood hotel room. Clara Blandick died that day at 85, closing out a life that began on the open sea and ended in quiet, devastating solitude. Pat Walsh as Nico, leader of the Winged Monkeys. Standing far shorter than most due to a form of dwarfism, Pat Walsh spent his childhood mastering circus tricks and mimicking animals, particularly monkeys and chimpanzees, to entertain crowds at some of America's biggest circus shows. That strange, specific skill set would end up defining his entire career, and at 38, it landed him one of the film's most menacing roles. That role was Nico, commander of the Wicked Witch's flying monkey army, and Walsh brought a genuinely unsettling presence to it, swooping down on Dorothy and her friends with a snarling intensity that terrified generations of young viewers and turned a supporting creature into one of the film's most memorable threats. Achieving that terror wasn't easy. He spent long hours sealed inside a tight fur suit and a thick rubber mask that covered his entire face, suspended from crude overhead cable rigs to simulate flight. The system was far from safe. Several of the flying monkey performers suffered a horrifying accident when their cables snapped mid-air, sending them crashing straight down onto the hard wooden soundstage floor and leaving them with serious bone injuries. Pat Walsh died on December 11, 1991, from a heart attack at 91, one of the longest surviving members of the cast, having outlived nearly every risk that came with playing one of Oz's most frightening creatures. Lois January as the Emerald City Manicurist. A dance-trained performer from McAllen, Texas, Lois January made her way to Los Angeles as a young woman and spent much of the 1930s starring opposite B-Western leading men like Johnny Mac Brown and Tim McCoy. By the time The Wizard of Oz came together, she was already a seasoned 25-year-old industry veteran. That scene was brief but unforgettable. One of the Emerald City's polished beauticians in the Merry Old Land of Oz number, singing to Dorothy and fussing over the Cowardly Lion's mane amid the film's dazzling green-tinted world. Small as it was, the role reportedly brought her more fan mail than any of her leading Western roles combined. After wrapping Oz, January moved to New York and reinvented herself yet again, landing roles in Broadway musicals like Yokel Boy, performing in nightclubs, and hosting radio programs during World War II. Lois January died on August 7, 2006, at 92, a performer who spent decades reinventing herself, from dusty Western sets to the glittering, uncredited streets of the Emerald City. Charles Becker as the Munchkin mayor. Born small in stature in Germany, Charles Becker crossed the Atlantic and found an unlikely home among the Singer Midgets, a troupe of performers who toured America's vaudeville circuits with song and dance. Years of touring eventually paid off when MGM came calling, recruiting the entire troupe en masse to populate the whimsical world of Munchkinland. At 51 years old, Becker became the town's Munchkin mayor, greering some of the film's most quoted lines with a comic seriousness that made the tiny official unforgettable. The Wizard of Oz turned out to be his final screen role. Because of their unusual appearance, The Munchkin performers were housed in cramped, cheap hotels in Culver City and largely kept isolated from the rest of the cast, treated by the studio as a curiosity rather than colleagues. Memoirs from the era later revealed that the psychological toll of that isolation and discrimination pushed several performers, including some in Becker's circle, toward heavy drinking and rowdy behavior back at the hotel after long days on set. Finally, he'd met fellow Munchkin performer Jesse Kelly, and the two married the following year, eventually settling in California, where Becker left Hollywood behind entirely to open his own sausage business. Charles Becker died on December 28, 1968, at 81, a man who traded the yellow brick road for a butcher's counter and never looked back. Lorraine Bridges as an Ozmite/voice of the Lullaby League. The voice Lorraine Bridges carried so pure and effortlessly high that it seemed built for fairy tales rather than ordinary life. Born in Wewoka, Oklahoma, she'd started out as a radio singer before signing with Paramount, and by the time MGM brought her onto The Wizard of Oz at 32, she was exactly the kind of talent the production needed for a very specific job, hitting notes most of the Munchkin performers simply couldn't reach. She lent her voice to the tiny, delicate melodies of the Lullaby League, the trio of Munchkin dancers who welcome Dorothy with a song so sweet and high-pitched it feels almost celestial. She even doubled as Billy Burke's singing voice for Glinda in the very same film. That anonymity followed her for years. Bridges kept working steadily as a Hollywood vocal stand-in throughout the early 1940s, quietly lending her voice to stars like Jeanette MacDonald in New Moon and Bittersweet, and Katherine Grayson in Rio Rita, before eventually stepping into the spotlight herself with a solo show at New York's famed Palace Theater in 1951. Lorraine Bridges passed away on December 4, 1993, at the age of 87, remembered by Oz historians as the invisible voice behind one of the film's most delicate musical moments. Dorothy Barrett as the Emerald City manicurist. At 22, Dorothy Barrett was already turning heads around Los Angeles as a dancer and photographic model, and it was that striking look that ultimately landed her a spot among the polished beauticians of the Emerald City. She delivered one of the film's most quietly charming exchanges. "We can make a dimpled smile out of a frown." That same year turned out to be extraordinary behind the scenes, too. She also appeared as an uncredited extra in Gone with the Wind, quietly working on two of the biggest productions of the era within months of each other. Recognition, however, never quite followed. Like so many background players of that time, Barrett spent the years afterward moving from one uncredited part to the next. A secretary in Mildred Pierce in 1945, a showgirl in Blue Skies in 1946, a face glimpsed in Monsieur Beaucaire the same year, and later small roles in The Big Clock and Copper Canyon. Never once seeing a cent in royalties as Oz played on television screens year after year, decade after decade, while the studio alone reaped the profits. Dorothy Barrett died on March 8, 2018, at the extraordinary age of 101, just 10 days after her birthday. One of the last surviving cast members of The Wizard of Oz, having quietly outlived nearly everyone else who once walked those Emerald City streets beside her. Buster Brody as a winged monkey. By the time The Wizard of Oz went into production, Buster Brody, born Max Broida in Pittsburgh, was already a battle-tested veteran of vaudeville and the silent film era, known throughout the industry for his small frame, his gift for physical comedy, and his willingness to throw himself into gags other performers wouldn't dare attempt. He was 53 years old when he took on one of the production's most dangerous assignments. That role placed him among the Wicked Witch's flying monkey army, one of the sinister, screeching creatures sent swooping down to terrorize Dorothy and her friends on their journey through the haunted forest. He kept working steadily for another decade after Oz, popping up in small comic roles across films like The Grapes of Wrath in 1940, Tales of Manhattan and Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch in 1942 and Lady in the Dark in 1944, right up through Bells of Rosarita in 1945, where he played a circus clown. Buster Brody died on April 9, 1948, at the age of 62, closing out a career that took him from the circus rings of his youth to the flying monkeys of Oz, and finally back to the clowns he'd started with. Terry as Toto. Terry started out as a nervous, easily spooked Cairn Terrier puppy from California, so skittish that her first owners simply gave up on her and handed her over to Carl Spitz, a veteran Hollywood animal trainer. By the time she was cast as Toto at just 5 years old, becoming one of the most disciplined performers on set. She wasn't a total newcomer to the screen either. Terry had already appeared alongside child star Shirley Temple in Bright Eyes back in 1934, but nothing came close to the fame Toto would bring her. As Dorothy's loyal, scrappy companion, she stole scenes from her human co-stars and became instantly recognizable to audiences everywhere. Arguably the most famous canine actor of her era. That fame translated directly into fortune, though not entirely her own. The income Terry generated helped Spitz grow his modest training operation into a sprawling, well-known dog training compound in Los Angeles, built almost entirely on the success of the little terrier who once couldn't handle a stranger's gaze. Terry died in 1945 at the age of 11, worn down by old age, and was laid to rest with real ceremony on Spitz's own property. Her grave didn't last, however. It was paved over in 1958 to make way for the construction of the Ventura Freeway, erasing the resting place of the dog who once walked the yellow brick road. So that's a look back at the Wizard of Oz actors in 2026. While some became Hollywood legends, others endured heartbreaking struggles, tragic losses, and lives far different from the magic we saw on screen. Which actor's story surprised you the most, and who was your favorite character from the Land of Oz? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more then and now updates.